We have a smaller group, small enough group.
Okay.
So we're recording.
All right. So welcome, everyone. Today, we're doing an empathy circle on the culture of empathy. And so we in the empathy tent or the culture of empathy group have been endeavoring to kind of outline what are the, XR, what are the major principles and values of a culture of empathy. So we invite you today to add your opinion, your creativity to that endeavor. And so the topic for today is, what value or principle would you feel would be really important in a culture of empathy? So that we're coming up with a list. So this is an ongoing thing, and you can see in the chat, I've given you one example of something that we've kind of come together. So this is, you might think, so I'll read it for those. Openness, a culture of empathy, values and encourages openness, which provides a foundation for mutual, deep understanding and empathic connection. This journey begins with being open about your own thinking and feelings and being willing to be open about the feelings of others. When we practice openness, it leads to a society where decisions are based on the best information and is open for all to see. So that's just one example of something that we've done. It's an unfinished, so we welcome your creativity to this endeavor. Edwin, would you like to say anything more?
Yeah, so it's a project we've been working on. I've been working for like 14 years on how do we build a more empathic culture. So yeah, thanks, Steve. And so it's really, our project is to create a set of values and really explore those and document those and, maybe write a book or something on these values. And so this is an exploration of that topic. So that's pretty much it. And so we just really want to hear from everyone what you think the values are that are most important. If there's a society built on empathy, we just had an earlier talk with Pavel before other people arrived, and we're just talking about the importance of empathy. If we just have empathy in schools that are sort of built on empathy in families, it would really transform society. But we need to sort of build the arguments, clearly describe what the values are that are core to a culture based on empathy. And that's what we are doing here. We're sort of like exploring that topic, and it takes a lot of dialogue, a lot of thought, a lot of experience. And so we're sort of a bit of an empathy tank here, not a think tank, but an empathy tank to kind of surface those. So yeah, that's kind of so that's the topic, is what will be, what do you think is the core values of a culture of empathy? And in future calls, we're going to be taking one value like openness or mutuality and going deep into it. But this call is a broad, open-ended, really to hear from everyone here what you think are core values to a culture of empathy. So with that, yeah, maybe we could do quick introductions, you think, since we're...
You want to do it in the main room? Okay. Yeah. And of course, you can also go to where you need to go. So if you need something is more alive for you, you're allowed to do that in the empathy circle. Okay. I'm going to go around my screen and I'll just ask you to introduce yourself, a quick introduction, who you are, where you are, and then we'll move on. So Pavel, could you start us off, please?
Hello, my name is Pavel Pev. I'm from Malta.
Okay.
So,
right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No problem. So, I work with a non-government organization, and I'm hoping that with it, I will be able to spread the mission of building a culture of empathy.
Great. Well, we need everyone we can get. Thank you, Pavel. Sophia?
I'm Sophia. I live in Sweden, and we are celebrating midsummer here. So that is why I'm wearing these flowers on my head.
Great.
And yeah. I'm just a regular participant in these circles.
Yes. Well, great to have your midsummer energy here. Okay. Anish?
Hi, I'm Anish. This is my first time in this space. Curiosity brings me here because I'm trying to get intimate with the concept of empathy. I have a certain understanding, but I definitely like to explore more and understand more of it. So happy to be here.
Great, welcome. Brian.
Hey everyone, my name is Brian from Ottawa, Canada, and I do applied empathy coaching and consulting. So I've been in about like maybe 5 or 6 of these now, and I've led about 5 or 6 on my own now as well. So I love these discussions.
Great, great, great having you. Kevin?
Hi there, I'm Kevin calling in from Guelph, Ontario, Canada. I'm very excited to be here today and really interested in the process of the empathy circle and how it's rooted in pre-colonial indigenous communication. I'm interested in that connection.
Yeah, very strong connections there. Neetu.
Hi, I'm Neetu, a for medical graduate, and I'm interested in empathy circles to. Oh.
That's fine.
I'm also interested in empathy circles and recently training to be a facilitator.
Great, great. Yeah, you completed that training. That's great. Dean.
Hi, I'm Dean from Plymouth, UK. I came across the Empathic Cafe properly doing the XR 10 principles. I'm interested in taking it further and doing the training.
Great,
it's
Dean.
Interesting project.
Great to have you. Divya.
Hi, I'm Divya. I'm from here, Brooklyn, New York. And I've also completed the facilitator training, and I'm looking forward to spreading the culture of empathy among healthcare workers.
Great, great to have you today.
Thank you.
James.
Yeah, I'm James. I'm here to bring a different perspective on what empathy is, conflict escalation, not just conflict avoidance. Anish, Bill, Sophia, 3 people here who are total conflict avoiders. And I'm here to offer a different perspective to that bullshit.
Okay, so James, let me kind of let you know that we're here to do an empathy circle, not necessarily, you know, into your agenda. So I'd like you to think very long and hard.
Bill, shut up. You're full of shit, Bill.
Okay. James, that's not the empathy circle. So, okay, Sarah. Oh, you're muted, Sarah.
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm with the Green Party of Alameda County, one of the county councilors, and I work on environmental issues and also the importance of bridging a lot of political and environmental divides right now, as I think Empathy Circle is so needed. Thank you so much.
Thanks. And Jolly, he, him.
Hi, I'm Jolly. I use he, him pronouns. I live in the valley north of Los Angeles, California. Yesterday was my first introduction to empathy circles with Edwin, working between XR America and XR US. So I'm excited to be here. I may need to drop out early.
Okay. All right. So welcome. And just to remind people that this call will be recorded. And so we will go into our breakout circles. Edwin, is there anything else?
Yeah, we have the first one will be Bill, circle 1. 2 will be Pavel with co-facilitation with Sophia. And number 3, Divya, would you be able to do the third one?
Sure, sure.
So it'll be 5 people in your group, but I think that some people might drop out. If somebody said, I think Neetu said she might have to leave early or something, or Jolly. So anyway, there'll be 5 in your group and 4 in the others. Okay, so we're ready to go into the, we'll go for,
Edwin,
yeah.
shall we record this?
Oh yeah, do you want to record? Are you familiar with recording? Can you do
I
the
can
recording?
record.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do
And
the
Divya, do you want to try trying the record too? In your
Sure,
circle?
I can do that.
Yeah, great. Okay, cool. Then we got 3 circles and we'll go into those now, opening all rooms.
Okay, are we all here, Edwin?
We're here. It's just
Okay.
4.
Great. All right, I think everybody here is familiar with the process. So let's talk. Who would like to start speaking?
I'll go first.
Okay.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're taking time and I'll speak
Yeah,
to
I'll
you.
keep time. Yeah. You're going to speak to me?
Yeah. So I kind of set this room up with James and us because there seems to be an issue. And I thought, hey, this is a good chance for us to start talking about it. So that's why the selection of who's here.
Okay. So you're saying that you set this room up with James and myself and you because James has issues. And so this might be a good venue to talk about it.
Well, I didn't say James has issues. I said there's sort of, I'm sensing a bit of a conflict. So I would like to kind of address it.
So you're correcting me in saying that not that James has issues, but that you're sensing a conflict. And so you'd like to deal with it in this format.
Yeah. And I think this is great in the sense that it gives us a chance to look at where the kind of the topic is, what is the culture of empathy? You know, what are the core values of it? And this is a chance to talk about, here's this issue that's a conflict, and we're trying to create a culture of empathy. What are the core values related to culture of empathy? And yeah.
Okay. So you're saying that this is an excellent real-time kind of educational experience to then take this conflict and then really use that to explore the core values of a culture of empathy.
And so for me, a core value is feeling awareness. And I haven't found a better term for it. Like a culture of empathy is to be sensitive to the felt experience and to be able to name a felt experience. And I'm seeing feeling awareness as like this core value, and empathy is feeling into. So if we feel into, we need to be sensitive to the felt experience.
So you're saying that feeling into, being able to feel what you're feeling and also be able to name it and describe it is a core value of a culture of empathy. And
yeah.
that leads to, you know, greater expressions.
Yeah, so I sense within myself, one, a sense of curiosity, like, oh, this is interesting. Here's a lot of energy. So there's a quality of valuing of curiosity, of going into these feelings. So that's the first feeling that I sense is curiosity.
So you're feeling that you have a sense of curiosity going into these feelings.
Yeah.
And that's the first kind of feeling that's sort of an entree to then your exploration.
2 is I feel some anxiety because when James gets really angry and kind of lashes out, there's this sort of sense of you know, when he's kind of raises his voice and says this is shit or whatever, it creates I sense a sense of anxiety in me. It's like, oh, there's this there's something. So I notice that as another feeling.
And so then you also sense in yourself anxiety because James, you know, when he gets really angry and when he starts cursing and things like that, that creates some anxiety.
Yeah, in terms of when we're going around the circle, you know, just introducing ourselves, you know, James had his time to introduce himself. You know, I think that you can kind of say what you want to say, And then there's a kind of an issue of, saying, James, we're not doing that here, or something like that. I think a step there could have been just to empathize at that moment, say, oh, I'm hearing you're feeling really upset or feeling angry. As a first step before saying we're not doing that, is we could have just said, oh, I hear you're just feeling upset or something.
Okay, so you're saying that rather than, setting a verbal limit, a first step and a more empathetic first step could have possibly been to just reflect in what James was putting out in his feelings.
Yeah, and I'm curious about this notion of conflict escalation. Like, does conflict escalation, does that create an empathic environment? Like, what does that mean? How does conflict escalation relate to a culture of empathy? And what's is that a value? Conflict escalation, is that a value? So I'm curious to find out more about that.
So you're curious to find out about conflict escalation and how that relates to a culture of empathy.
Yeah. So I feel heard.
Okay, thanks. All right. James, will you listen to me?
I'll do my best.
Sure. James, I feel fully heard right now. And so I'll be happy to pass to you as a speaker.
So Bill, I feel you feel fully heard and you're happy to pass to me.
Right.
Okay. Brian, would you hear me?
Yes, I'm listening, James.
Thanks. I'm having a difficult time making space for my anger right now.
Mm.
And I am angry about an email that I received from Bill about something like a requirement that I participate in an empathy circle in order to participate in the facilitation trainings that are being offered by Building a Culture of Empathy group. I'm angry about it because there is I'm experiencing ongoing harassment, and I consider that one kind of harassment. I have a lot of feelings because Anish, who is in the empathy circle calls today, he kicked me out of 2 groups in the last month, and there's been no dialogue about that. And I've messaged 100 people at least, and there's just been a lot of silence. So I feel like I'm holding a lot, and I agree with Edwin. I think that if we give each other a minute to introduce ourselves, if I'm going to use that minute in a way that makes sense to me, I don't want to be harassed for it and be told, don't bring anger in. You can only, describe yourself in a professional way, name the groups that you're part of, the norm. I feel like it's a bit of a gray area.
Can I pause you there, James, to start reflecting?
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm hearing that it's like, I am angry and frustrated, and it's like, I want to express some of it, but I'm having a hard time like holding space for that right now. And I feel like I have a lot of reason to be angry. I'm being met by silence. I was kicked out of a couple of groups, and I've sent out 100 emails or so, but it's like, I just want to engage in a dialogue.
Yeah, I want to address the question, the curiosity from Edwin around conflict escalation and whether this is a value in the culture of empathy. I think it's a good and important question. What I see is that conflict suppression, I don't think that conflict suppression is a value of a culture of empathy. And I think that there's a bias towards conflict suppression in ourselves and in others. And conflict escalation, is it a value? I'm going to keep an open mind about it. I don't know. I think it is, but I'm not sure. I would say that authenticity is a value in a culture of empathy. And I think that that there's some important connection between authenticity and conflict escalation, where we bring what's going on to the surface, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's uncomfortable, even if we know it's uncomfortable for someone else.
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
So what I'm picking up on is a sense of almost like I'm infuriated almost that like there's a bias towards, you know, a conflict avoidance. Can we not like recognize that? Like, I don't know about conflict escalation necessarily, but at the very least, we need to not avoid conflict. And I believe in authenticity, and there's a way in which I'm not being met. I want to have an honest dialogue and a conversation, but because I feel like I can't, I'm like really angry.
Yes. So there's a certain structure to the empathy, to this group's empathy circles. And I'm doing my best to bring conflict escalation in a way that is within the boundaries of this community. So I'm not here to disrupt this community. I'm here to work within the boundaries of the community, because if there's no boundaries, if there's no container, then actually it's very hard to engage conflict in a constructive way. And I see that's my time. So last reflection, please.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like I value respect, I value structure, and I want to bring conflict. I'm okay with, you know, trying to find a way to express myself within this empathy circle structure.
Not just okay with it, it's essential that there be clear boundaries.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, it's essential that there are clear boundaries, and I want to work within those.
Yes, thank you. I feel heard.
Thanks, James. Okay, Bill, would you hear me?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
I'm feeling so grateful to be a part of these 4 people right now. Like, it almost, honestly, like at the very beginning, as we were into our breakout rooms, because I had a sense of anxiety too with James's first expression, I was like, oh, I hope I'm not in that group. And then all of a sudden I'm here, and it's almost bringing tears to my eyes, because I, like Edwin said, I really value getting to experience this process when there's charged emotion. And it's like a real gift to get to receive, James.
So you're really feeling very grateful to be in this group. It's, you know, it's a very charged situation, which does give you some anxiety, but it's also a tremendous learning opportunity. And you're really hearing that, you know, sort of trying to get into the depth of what James really means.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a value like is respect, I think. And what does respect mean? What does validation mean? I think validation is a huge word in my vocabulary when it comes to empathy. And so like for me, as I'm listening to James, I was really understanding how, you know, silence can be infuriating for me in my own life. You know, it's like if I can't even engage in some type of constructive dialogue, it feels like I can't be seen and heard, and that leaves me with a sense of helplessness.
Mm-hmm. So you're kind of identifying with James in that sense of a silence and not being responded to, and you can empathize with that feeling because that frustrates you as well.
Yeah, I think the most terrifying feeling for a human being is helplessness. It's like complete out of control. I can't do anything about something. And so to me, you know, anger is a very natural human reaction that I think empathy circles, I'm excited to see how they can, as James was saying, be a constructive part of helping people express themselves fully.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying it's profound, that feeling of when that feeling of helplessness is a very, very core fear of human beings. And so you're excited to see how the empathy circle process can address that and how, you know, let people express themselves.
Yeah, so another core value for me is safety. And I wrote an article on psychological safety specifically, and like kind of what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, you know, that is like the underpinnings of that allows everything else, whether it be respect and openness, everything else. Like, we have to feel safe, and this structure in itself creates that safety. I'm not going to be interrupted right now.
Mm-hmm. So one of the issues that you deal with is safety, and that's a core also human need, and that the structure of these circles creates safety because you know that you will be uninterrupted and heard.
And I think the distinction that I make between psychological safety and regular safety is, like, we know we're actually safe physically, but psychologically, it's like, because we're identified with our thoughts, I think it's really important to help people understand how we can create psychological safety intentionally.
Okay, so you're contrasting between physical safety, we are physically safe at this point, and psychological safety, and you're looking into that and how we can create that atmosphere of psychological safety.
Mm-hmm. So maybe another value that we kind of shared already, authenticity and honesty. And a value for me, and along those same lines, is self-expression, because so much, I believe, through socialization has been pushed down. So I think there's a lot of repressed anger culturally. We're traumatized as a society. And so, an empathy circle that can create safe space for all types of expression, whether it be anger or otherwise, I think is very healthy.
Okay. So you're thinking that this expression of the repressed anger, allowing a safe outlet or therapeutic outlet of the repressed anger, can lead to greater understanding.
I feel heard. Thank you.
Okay. 19 seconds to spare.
All right.
All right. Okay. So Edward, would you listen to me?
Listening.
Okay. So taking what you said, I'm considering it, and the empathy circle is a place when it's your turn to speak, you can basically be pretty free. In the introductory circle, when James started to name people, that crossed the line for me. And that is psychological safety, because it wasn't an isolated incident. And I've had to deal with a lot of issues that he's created where, because of his cursing and because of his outbursts and because of his naming of people, people have felt very psychologically unsafe in the empathy circle. And I think those people weren't heard, and that's it. I'll stop there.
Okay, so during the introduction, James was cursing and naming people, and you felt that was sort of an unsafe expression, and that sort of crossed a line, and it's happened other times as well, and it creates a lack of safety in the group.
Right.
And it's just something you've been dealing with multiple times.
Right. And also on a personal level, James and I have had an ongoing 1-hour call for, 4 or 5 times on Saturdays before an empathy circle. As far as I can feel, and for what James told me, it was convivial, it was fine. And what he doesn't mention is that I also offered him a venue to talk to me, and we can, talk, personally. That's not mentioned. It's not mentioned that I also considered his feelings, in his email, and was certainly ready to dialogue. The empathy circle that he says that he doesn't want to, he suggested that empathy circle. And so I believe that a dialogue and a culture of empathy one of the things we have is mutuality. And I feel that James, as far as I'm concerned, personally, and also I consider this professionally, has violated the mutuality because he refuses to actually listen and take in the things that I do offer in ways of dialogue and also support. He was going through a tough time, and I offered him, aside from this, just like a personal empathy buddy call. That doesn't seem to be recorded when I'm being cursed at.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop
So
there.
you see that mutuality is a core value in a culture of empathy, and do you feel like you've contributed or really tried to reach out to and dialogue with James and try to develop a relationship? And when he's cursing and doing these things, it feels like you're not being seen for all that you've tried to do in terms of develop a relationship with him.
Right, but it's not just my thinking that mutuality is a core value. You think it's a core value, and many other people. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so you're just saying that it's not just you who see mutuality, but other people too, including myself. And just you'd kind of like to see some, I guess I'd like to see some acknowledgement that mutuality is a core value.
That's right. So I do feel, triggered because also I put myself out personally to James, and I feel that, in a personal way, when I do that, I expect a person to deal with me personally. And again, it's not like we've had an acrimonious history. We've actually had, I thought, some nice, interesting conversations. So I think that, so I'm coming down to mutuality, and that's all I have to say for right now.
Yeah, so you really felt you had sort of a congenial, friendly relationship with James, is kind of what I'm understanding, and that's not being seen or somehow not being acknowledged.
Thanks, Jim.
You really,
Right. Thanks, Edwin. I feel fully heard.
Okay. Speak to James then.
Listening.
Boy, not sure what to say. I want to say, see, I always take notes. I got all kinds of notes. Making notes about the values, about authenticity, self-expression, safety, respect, validation, mutuality. So I got all these notes over here.
Yeah, so you're finding this conversation fruitful, for all the values are coming to the surface and you're writing them down as quickly as you can. Safety, self-expression, mutuality, authenticity, and maybe others.
Exactly. But I also want to see, well, what's sort of arising, for me, like what's just coming up in the moment. And that what comes to me is, I think that the moment that sort of started this sort of a disconnection was when we were in the Empathy Circle Facilitator Support Group. And there was a person who was speaking, and it was Bob's turn for his 15 minutes. Someone was speaking to him, and I'm gonna pause there.
So you're wondering when some of this, so you're wondering what's emerging in you, and you're remembering a moment that you think is pivotal, Empathy Circle Support Group, where Bob was facilitating and another person began to speak to Bob. Yeah.
And then while I was having that thought, another thought came up that I want to say, this is not NVC. I don't do NVC. Whatever you got issues with NVC, this ain't it, because I do not do NVC.
So you are reassuring me that whatever's happening now, it's not NVC, because you don't do NVC.
Right. So that's one thing. I just want to be that clear. So the issue, though, was that it was Bob's turn, and and during that time, it's Bob's turn to facilitate that time. And on the side in the chat room, you wrote, something about shit. I don't know, this shit. And it's like, it was sort of that kind of, at that moment when you wrote that, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it seemed that was sort of a trigger that has set off sort of a chain reaction. And so that's that moment of you writing that it is where I just see it was a pivotal sort of a moment for a chain reaction of sort of tension or something.
At that time, I wrote in the chat, I can't put up with this shit. or something like that. And that was a pivotal moment that created a chain reaction. You're noticing.
Yeah. And, you know, there was some frustration. I was feeling it too with what the person was saying, you know, but it's like, you know, we're trying to navigate, how do we do this and hold this space empathically, and it's Bob's time to facilitate as he wishes. And it seemed that it was sort of like an interruption. And it's sort of a gray area, right? It's like doing an empathy circle. It's your time, my time to speak, and everybody else is being quiet. But when we type into the chat room, we're sort of like interrupting the person's time to speak. So, you know, we haven't set a rule, but hey, you know, one person speaks, and then the chat is, you know, we don't kind of have side conversations in the chat. So we never had a clear, you know, agreement about that. But it does seem to be sort of a gray area. And it did seem like it was sort of an interruption of Bob's time. Yeah.
So there's a gray area because writing in the chat is an interruption to Bob's time. And well, so you're thinking, what does that mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, can we have an agreement that we have a conversation? We don't try to have side conversations. You know, we could maybe kind of have that be a request for an agreement, or it could even be put into the heading, you know, into the description of what the rules of the agreement are for the call. So that's just something I'm thinking about.
You're brainstorming solutions to make clearer agreements around use of space and interrupting.
And then I was just in a call with Jolly, who was here about the XR US, XR America, and we had a guy there who's he was just he was well I'll finish this then. I guess so while we were talking, he was there holding up signs in the other window, writing things, kind of bouncing things around. So it was like totally disruptive. So he was kind of sort of breaking the structure. You know, we hadn't said, well, when you pay attention, but you know, and yeah, finally I had to say, anyway. So those are just sort of like gray areas, I think, within.
Yeah, so you just came from a call where Jolly was interrupting.
It wasn't Jolly. He was in that call. It was somebody else. Yeah.
There was somebody else was disrupting with signs, and so it's there's a pattern, or it's on your mind what it means.
Yeah, I feel heard. Thanks.
Sure. Brian, would you listen to me, please?
I'm listening.
So there's some systems disagreements about what's going on, because if we say that Bob is facilitating, then there shouldn't be an issue with people interrupting. Then it's Bob's job to deal with it. But what I see happening is saying that Bob is facilitating is what it actually means is do what Bob says. And if you disagree with Bob, or if somebody doesn't like the way you talk to Bob when Bob is facilitating, then other people will, deal with you outside of when Bob is facilitating. So there's a question about what it means to have Bob facilitating. Is it Bob's job to deal with someone who's interrupting, or is the whole group going to secretly destroy the person who makes it hard for somebody to quote unquote facilitate? That's one thing. The other thing is I absolutely knew I was interrupting at that time. So.
Can I pause you just before you go on that?
No. Okay. I want to say about what Bill is bringing that I'm sad about it, because a lot of what Bill has said is true. We've mostly had a convivial relationship, and so then the issue for me is, why am I getting a mess? If we have a convivial relationship, why am I getting private messages that say this? Our purpose is to establish whether you're committed to the empathy circle process, believe in its benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So my loyalty and my adherence to the empathy circle religion it comes up in question in private. I don't know who else has to deal with this kind of, prove yourself that you are committed, and it's not going to come up in public. It's going to come up in private. Well, to me, it's like when a policeman goes into a black neighborhood and says, "Hey, I just want to talk to you." Hey, right? You can't separate the fact that he has the authority of a policeman who wants to talk to you and say, "Hey, why are you running away from me? I just want to have a conversation," right? Bill has a position of authority in leading the facilitation trainings or organizing it that I can't separate. This email that I get from him is not just from a friend who's asking, "Hey, are you really committed? What do you think? I'm curious about what you think. Do you agree or do you disagree?" It's more of the authority comes in and says, you have to prove to me in private, to my satisfaction, that you believe, that you're going to be nice and we can deal with you, right? Now, I totally get that may be a concern. Great. But then I need to respond to that to defend myself, because it's not going to work to be in a private trial with Bill and Lou, the other trainer, right? So on my side, I don't want to say I'm sad. Yeah. Yes, I am sad that my commitment, my values are under question because I engage in conflict escalation rather than conflict suppression. Bill talks about people who he's had to help and deal with. Where the fuck are they? They're not engaging in an empathy circle with me. They're bringing it through private channels. And that's the whole issue that I'm raising, is that it's getting suppressed. It's getting suppressed personally by people who are in the community and who don't bring it up in empathy circles. And then it's even worse. It's getting suppressed at a systemic level where people in positions of authority are then separating out, right? There was one time where Edwin followed a request of Sophia to put us in separate empathy circles. And it's still an open question for me. Do I have the ability to request, put Anish and Sophia and Bill in an empathy circle with me, right? Or is it just a bias towards avoiding conflict?
Okay, thank you. So what I'm hearing is a value of transparency and this secrecy and silence towards, the way that an authority figure is dealing with a problem or an issue is being done to the side. And that's kind of infuriating for me. I feel destroyed and I feel sad about that. I want these things to be out in the open. So it's like not necessarily as much as about conflict escalation as what infuriates me is the avoidance of talking about these things out in the open.
That's the same as conflict escalation.
Okay.
But thank you. I feel heard.
Thank you. Edwin, would you listen to me?
Yep, listening.
Okay, so I'm loving this topic of transparency as a value, because I definitely hold that value as well. And what does that look like? And maybe there are some blurred areas of what is shared, like where's the personal conversations, what's happening in groups, how do we handle this? It sounds like there's some gray area and I'm not really sure myself either.
So you're appreciating this discussion, and especially about like transparency and sort of openness and what's private, what's public, and there's a lot of you're not really sure about this. You're just enjoying the exploration of the whole topic.
It's really nice getting to be in the listener role with like a charged emotion and feel like I don't have to have any responsibility. Like I received all of that really calmly, and I'm just like genuinely interested, curious, empathetic. Like I'm like, yeah, it makes sense to me. I would feel that way too if I were James.
So you're appreciating the listener role, that you don't have to do anything except really hear where he is and sort of understand it. And in fact, you found it actually quite interesting, or sort of really sort of agree or appreciate what's been said.
What do I want to say on that? In terms of values, again, yeah, so I'm noticing I feel very calm in my body right now, like very relaxed, like almost more than normal, which is really interesting. Yeah. And, oh, that's what I wanted to say. So I'll pause there first.
Okay, just sensing into your body, feeling a sense of calmness and relaxation.
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting topic about authority, you know, and the role of facilitators. And we give some power to authority or perceived authority and facilitators. And that's like hopefully a conscious thing that we do, and we don't always have to follow, but we can start just kind of, we can flick into that, you know, I'm the follower and you're the leader, and these balances of power and how they're being held. And I think that's a really interesting topic.
Mm-hmm. So just maybe even as a trainer yourself, you're thinking of you know, the role of facilitation and the power dynamics, and how a certain relationship gets created as a leader and a follower, and just sort of looking at that whole aspect, maybe the authority aspect of it, and how we kind of take on these roles.
I love the value of equality too. I think that's something that James was bringing up there a bit, was like, well, if someone can request to not be in a group with me, can I request and have equal weight to have them be in a group with me? I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, you know, equality. Yeah. So like, are we unconsciously favoring certain people for certain reasons that we might not be aware of, right? This is unconscious bias, right? And there's a bias blind spot, right? That's a cognitive thing. So it's really interesting. I think this is happening globally right now, you know, and so this is our maybe little manifestation of that same unconscious bias. How is that playing out?
So you're sort of appreciating that that aspect of, if one person requests not to be in a group with someone, can the other person request that they are in the group? And you sort of have an appreciation for the value of equality, that everyone has sort of an equal sort of a say there.
Mm-hmm. And then that pointed to another value there, which was, oh, humility. I think that's built into empathy, right? You've got to be able to hold more than one perspective, opposing perspectives. You've got to be willing to have your mind changed. You know, listening is inherently vulnerable. If I actually open myself up to taking you in, I could be changed by what you say, you know? So I think humility and coming from that place is extremely important.
So you see another value of humility, that you have to be able to listen and sort of actually take in what the other person is saying. And if you do that, you might actually be changed. And so there's a certain, I guess, vulnerability of your body might be changed.
Mm-hmm. And thanks. Oh. I feel heard. Thanks, Edwin.
Okay. Oh, then Bill?
Listening?
You? Yeah, so the thing with empathy is that it's almost like everything, there's empathy and there's everything else, right? And so everything else can block sort of empathy. And I just see that aspect.
So you think that you're saying that there's empathy in everything else. So anything you're doing that's not empathy can block empathy.
Yeah, it can be, it can lead to problems.
It can lead to problems.
So it's like you're kind of open. It's like there's so many blocks to empathy. It's like it's just like it's amazing, and it's like, you know, yeah. And so I'm kind of aware of that. So So I'm just kind of sitting with that awareness.
So you're sitting with the awareness of, like, you know, how challenging it is to be in an empathetic place.
Yeah. And I would say, is conflict escalation, is that an empathic space? You know, is the actions of conflict escalation being empathic, or is it sort of a block to empathy, as well as the reaction to the escalation right? That so it's like, can we be in a totally empathic space? And how would you do conflict escalation from an empathic space, right? So I don't know quite how that works.
So you're kind of working at is conflict escalation a value of culture of empathy, and also the reaction to that. And you find that in that give and take, you lose empathy. So you're trying to think about how an empathic space can, contain those reactions and concepts.
Yeah, it's like if it's like, oh, I'm gonna escalate this.
Mm-hmm.
Is the act of escalation empathic? Is it in the empathic, what do we mean? It means feeling into. So are we feeling, I mean, there's the feeling into what I'm sensing in the moment, what I sort of is myself, or feeling into, and then expressing that, as well as feeling into the other. So yeah, I'm kind of, this whole thing of escalation, and even James was saying he's not sure if about the conflict escalation, about how it relates to culture of empathy.
So you're really going and investigating the idea of conflict escalation and how that it can be or is not empathic. And you've noted that James has some questions about that as well. So you're just kind of, dealing with that now.
Yeah, and then it's, so I totally agree. I was in a little quandary there about Sophia and her not wanting to be in the circle, because I totally agree. There's sort of that sense of equality that that's a great articulation of that dilemma there, because my inclination is work it out. If you don't want to be in an empathy circle with James, be in an empathy circle with James and work it out, So that's my natural inclination, but we're all kind of learning at this too. So we're all kind of growing, we're all kind of struggling, we're all going into the gray areas.
Mm-hmm.
And and I appreciate the things that, that James is bringing up around this.
Mm-hmm. So you were considering what James said about Sophia, and then wondering, okay, what about that? If you have a problem with James, work it out in an empathy circle.
Yeah.
And then in a more macro sense, you're also looking at the greater, how the growth is happening, and we're all struggling and making mistakes and learning at the same time.
Yeah, and I do, especially that. Yeah, so I was like, people have said, oh yeah, I don't have James, take part in this. And I'm saying, James always follows the process in the empathy circle, and as long as people are following the process, they should. That's whoever wants to come can come. That's the agreement. So my inclination would have been that Sophia has an empathy circle with James.
Okay. So you're feeling that things are open-ended, and that even though people said don't invite James, you feel that, this should be explored in an empathy circle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel heard. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Brian, I will speak to you.
I am listening.
Okay. Well, what we're trying to do here is kind of almost define in a general way the principles and values of a culture of empathy. And I don't know how conflict escalation feeds into that. I also, I feel sometimes in an empathy circle, people reveal vulnerabilities, and to force them prematurely to interact with someone who they view as abusive, I think is abusive. And I will not be a party to it. And not only that, but if you really don't care about the values and the culture of empathy and creating a welcoming space, that's okay. And I question my involvement here. I will not be a party to psychological abuse or bullying. I'll stop there.
So we're exploring culture of empathy values generally, and you don't see how conflict escalation fits into that. Because what you won't be a part of is putting people together in a way that's like forceful, and like that would be abusive to force someone into a situation where they don't feel safe.
Right. There are many things that James leaves out in his, his retelling of things. I wanted to deal with the issue of authority. Facilitation is different from participating in an empathy circle. And there's just a whole lot, as I'm learning myself. And so it is different. And what James, first of all, James said I was calling him into an inquisition. No, there was a larger group of people who were willing to have an empathy circle with him. That's incorrect. And then he said, I'd like to have an empathy circle with you and Lou. And then he was wondering about it. And then, yes, I have questions about, his ability and desire to facilitate. And if I'm going to train someone, I need to know about that. And also what he left out is that maybe he doesn't want to have this. Maybe he did feel pressured, set it aside, come back to it later, have some more empathy circles and things like that. But sometimes you have to, much to Edwin's annoyance, I was a special ed teacher for 40 years. And I know what abused people look like. And they need some protection. They need to know there's a safe container there. And I won't be a party to abuse. I'll stop there.
So it sounds like James leaves some things out, and so you're trying to bring some of those things into the picture. You do question his ability and desire to be a facilitator, and if you are training someone, you want to be clear on what that is, because again, you won't be a party to abuse, and that those people do need some type of protection and standing up for.
Right. And then you say, well, everything that's not empathy is a block to empathy. Who gets to define empathy then? That's what we're talking about here, and it's an ongoing thing. But I think you are on a slippery slope when you start to say, oh, that's not empathy or things like that. And I also, at the same time, I'm saying certain things are not empathy. And that's sort of the human comedy in which we exist. I'll stop there.
So it sounds like there's this human comedy where there's like this paradox. I'm both saying what empathy is and what it's not, and it's kind of just going back and forth, like who has this authority to define what this is and isn't, and I do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that being said, as far as, addressing my attitude towards James' facilitation, I would not train him at this particular point, but I am always open to having my mind changed through ongoing interactions. But I do have standards, both personal and professional standards, and my friends and colleagues respect those, and I respect theirs. And I'm done.
So you have personal and professional standards, and at this time you don't feel like James meets those standards, so you're not willing to train him, and you respect other people's standards, and you feel kind of valid in your concerns to uphold those standards.
Thank you, Brian. I feel fully heard.
Thanks. Okay. James, would you hear me?
Listening.
Okay, so I wrote a few things down here. So I loved what Bill said about, not forcing anyone into a conversation. I believe that we all have a right to request that. And, I'm with James too. It's like, yeah, I think we should be transparent in trying to have those conversations and encourage people to have them when they feel they're able to or comfortable in doing so.
Yeah, so you agree with Bill. It's really important to let people decide for themselves when to have a conversation, with who to have a conversation.
And I also agree with you, like I said, like this ability to request that. And I think, you know, maybe part of a culture is like something around how we're handling conflict. And maybe it is the value of just transparency or of request or something like that, to have that leaning towards, hey, we value having these conversations sometime, you know?
Yeah, okay, so the other side of valuing choice is that you would value that it's okay for people to request, I would like to have an empathy circle with these people, and they can say no if they, or just not show up. It's but that part of doing the culture of empathy is that we're acting out, we're living this belief that that the empathy circle and empathic reflection is why we're here, to do it.
And so I love that question of like, what would it take? Like maybe part of that facilitator's role or something, or some mediators to ask like, what would it take to help you feel safe to have that conversation? And maybe we have a conversation just about that, so that that conversation can be had sooner than later. Because to put it off infinitely, you know, doesn't make anyone feel good either. So I just like, you know, maybe facilitating that dialogue.
So putting off difficult conversations doesn't help. And you're wondering, as a facilitator or as a facilitation team, what questions or things can be done to engage with some of the avoidance and say, well, what would help to increase safety? What would make it possible to have the conversation?
So that, yeah, exactly. So I think a value that I hold is ownership. So then that part is part of what creates safety, is like, okay, so we're not just going to step in, have this empathy circle process and just be blaming each other. We have to come in willing to have our minds changed, to see with humility, and we have to speak from the I and say, here's how I'm actually feeling when you don't want to talk to me.
So a big value for you is ownership, where someone owns their experience and their feelings and is willing to say, you know, I feel this way when you don't talk to me, or I feel this way when you are talking to me.
So another value like is collaboration, because like if we're approaching it on the same team, because empathy to me is about being on the same team. It's not me versus you, it's us. So if we're creating a culture of empathy, then what are we going to do to solve this problem together? Because there's a divide here, and empathy is all about bridging divides. So can we approach this from a different frame where it's not me versus you, it's we're all in this together. So what are we going to do about this?
So the value of empathy, or the activity of empathy to you, is it's a group activity. It's a team activity where we come together as a team to look at difficult questions, difficult feelings, and ask together what we are going to do to address challenges.
And so to me, like also this value that's with that, or the feeling, is what I'm trying to train in people, just even outside empathy circles, is what is it like to be with someone? This being with, this belonging, this feeling of connection, where it's beyond cognitive empathy of you're just able to repeat back what I say, but that I actually, as the speaker, can even feel that you're with me. I want to feel that witness with someone.
You want to feel witness, and the experience of what this question of what does it mean to be with another person, be with them empathically, but just to be with someone.
Yes, thank you, James.
Thank you. Edwin, would you listen to me, please?
Yeah, listening.
For me, a really good example of conflict escalation is the lunch counter sit-ins in the South, where during Jim Crow, Black people didn't want to put up with what was going on, basically engaged in civil disobedience. They sat down where they were not allowed to sit down, and they said, no, we're going to break a rule, and we're going to be sitting here in your face, and if you're uncomfortable, that's okay. And thinking about this thing of, is it empathic? What I'm noticing is it's empathic towards oneself. Like the Black people who did that held empathy for themselves. They were angry about how they were being treated. And I think we can look back on that and say, to demand that those Black people had empathy for the whites who were uncomfortable with them being at the lunch counter seems backwards, because there was already a systemic violence being committed against the Blacks. To then, on top of that, insist that they be empathic, and really, as if being empathic towards the white people who were uncomfortable would mean that they would then not break the rules, is a real twisting of understanding empathy or justice. That so I don't want to pretend that it's such a charged example, right? Because that's there's a lot of pain right now around racism and how Blacks are being treated. So there's some fear and embarrassment in giving that example, as if what we're doing here is, it comes up to the level of that kind of courage and work. But I think that the principle holds.
Well, can I reflect there?
Yeah.
So you have an example of where conflict escalation how it would work, and it was the lunch counter protests that we had Blacks doing these lunch counter protests because they had empathy for themselves. They weren't being heard. There was this power authority over them, and so for them, they have to listen to themselves, but to say, oh, don't do what you're doing because you're empathizing with the people in power, that there's something that doesn't quite fit, and that you're also feeling some concern about even using that as an example because of the context, the larger context, that's so much more severe than kind of stuff that we're doing here. So maybe a little concern about even using that as an example, but it does seem to fit. It seems like you do feel it fits. So
yeah. I think that there's a rift in understanding what abuse means, because I don't think it's possible in this virtual world to force someone to be in a Zoom call. And then there's something like, what I hear, it's like I'm being punished for the way I'm participating in the empathy circle. To have it called abusive, I don't want to attack people. I don't want to call people names. I don't want to curse. My understanding of a culture of empathy is very much that thing which you talked about at the beginning, and when the felt experience, or the sensory experience of our emotions, feelings, connecting to our feelings, that is a culture of empathy. And absolutely, when I am cursing at someone, I'm disconnected from that. I'm disconnected from a felt experience of my anger, of my discomfort. And there are reasons for it. It's not just because I like to yell at people, but there are other things which are invisible, which are happening, which I'm really angry about. And so again, there's you know, Bill says, well, he's not going to teach me. Because why? Because I'm unteachable, or because I'm not professional, as if getting angry is not professional. I agree with you, I'm sorry, Brian, that it's a team activity. I want to be part of a team. I want to have discussions as a team, but not at the expense of being honest about what's going on. I don't want to be part of a team. I don't think that a team that is dishonest about what's actually going on can be effective.
So you want to be part of a team, but the team has to be honest, and if it's not being honest, it can't be effective. So you really, and also I was hearing that you don't want to be kind of angry or whatever, because you feel a sense of disconnection, but it's sort of like you sort of have to sort of be heard or in that environment.
I don't have to, but it happens. Yeah.
You don't have to do this, but it's just sort of something that happens.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Edwin.
Okay, I'll speak to Brian.
I'm listening.
Okay. Okay, I use that lunch counter example too for what I would call empathic direct action. So I think that one thing that happened with the civil rights movement that, well, at least Kingian nonviolence as I understood it, was first thing you see a problem, you go to the people who are in power that can kind of make the change, and you say, hey, can we have a dialogue about it? That's like the step one. And then what happened in that situation with the blacks in the South was the people in power said, no, we're not going to talk to you about this because we don't need to talk to you. We got the power and we don't need to listen to you. So just go and shut up. So then they do the action that sort of surfaces that the power over, and then you do the action to bring people to the table. So then it's like the last step is that you have that dialogue. So you start with an invitation to a dialogue, you know, about a problem. People will not have that dialogue for umpteen million reasons. They say, we're not going to talk to you. And then you do some kind of an action, and that sort of with the ultimate goal of bringing people into a dialogue. And so I'll just, yeah, that's a lot there, but it's, you know.
Yeah, so I heard three main points there where it's like to address something, you need to have an invitation to dialogue. If the dialogue is not met, you know, maybe there's some power structure that won't hear you, then you take some action to bring to light or to surface something there that with the intention, so that action, no matter what it is, I think you're drawing to the importance of like the intention is to still have the dialogue, mm-hmm. not to like necessarily hurt or something like that.
Yeah. And that I would have added, if I was at that time, I'm trying to do now, is that the request for that dialogue is an empathy circle. So now I think that was sort of a piece, if that would have been added and sort of held, it was like, hey, we want an empathy circle with Bull Connor. And we're not leaving until we have an empathy circle with Bull Connor or whoever else it is. And so that's the piece I would sort of add now into what I would call empathic direct action, which is it's about having the empathic dialogue. You know, we have to take methods to bring people to the table because, and then we have the dialogue doing what we're doing now. We take the time to have everybody's voice be heard.
So use that example in the past of like, what you would have changed is like you could actually request not just a dialogue, but the empathy circle specifically as a way of having that dialogue.
Yeah, it was one of my dreams. We have 50,000 people in the Capitol Mall in DC, and we demand that the Senate and the representatives have empathy circles across the political divide. And I think we could really do a lot to create an empathy movement doing some kind of an action like that.
So you'd love to demand empathy circle in DC, and you think that would create a lot of change in the empathy movement.
And then, so how do we deal with that at sort of a level of kind of individuals, you know, so it's, you know, we can get upset. So the first step perhaps is, hey, I would like an empathy circle with you about this issue, whatever the issue comes up, and let's talk this through. So that's the initial, and then do all the other stuff, the anger or whatever you want to do, but with the intention of the empathy circle being the final, kind of the final goal. So that's sort of the framework I have in mind for me. Yeah.
So the framework you have in mind is intentionally requesting an empathy circle to deal with an issue. And then maybe it sounds like you might acknowledge that there might be some type of anger or hurt that comes out in as an action to try and make that happen, because it's obviously you're requesting it for a reason, but ultimately to try and have that dialogue using that process.
And the value for me of a culture of empathy is sort of like the universality of empathy. And one of the principles that would be, and I'm not quite sure what the word for universality of empathy is a value, but the principle, you know, the action of it is being willing to empathically dialogue with everyone, anyone, everyone and anyone. So if I'm supporting a culture of empathy, I'm willing to talk with anyone.
Okay, so there's this value of universality there. And it's like, okay, if you actually are in support of creating a culture of empathy, it's like almost an assumption of like, wouldn't you be open to having a dialogue using that process?
Yeah, and I can understand the person that James was angry with or upset about in that circle was not being empathic. She was like, maybe from her own traumas, I don't know what it was, but she was not listening to other people. She was totally in her own world. And, you know, it's like, I'm not going to take the victim. Personally, I think empathy doesn't victimize people. I'm not going to see her as a victim, you know, or getting out of this victim, seeing people as victim. I want to empathize with her and all the parties involved. So it's like, how do we bring people into that empathic space? So is a question, and it's tough, you know, because she probably doesn't want to. If people don't want to do an empathy circle, then they're saying they're not valuing the universality of empathy, and they're not willing to dialogue with anyone. So I think and then we got to how do we bring them to the table, you know? And that's a question.
It sounds like there's an underlying, there's this question of maybe we could use the values of a culture of empathy to enroll people to have difficult discussions sometimes. And maybe you're also, you recognize that, you know, she might have triggered some other type of trauma, which you can empathize with, but you don't want to make her a victim, because empathy and culture of empathy is about empowerment maybe, and not seeing that person in that way. And this process is like built for these types of discussions.
But I just have to finish that. She has to be willing to take part in an empathy circle too, to be supporting of an empathy circle and saying, I'm out of here. I'm not dealing with this, you know, for whatever reasons people. So everybody's got a responsibility, mutual responsibility for taking part in an empathy circle.
Yeah. So there's this mutual responsibility that is this willingness to partake in this universality of empathy and the process.
I feel fully heard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, Bill, would you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so what did I write down here? You know, one thing I heard from, I heard from both Bill and from James was like this, I will not be a part of. Which was really interesting, because it's like, okay, so they each have kind of standards of what they will not stand for, which is where, you know, anger naturally comes from. And then it's interesting that we're having a conversation about values of what's bringing us together. So what are we about? And then there's the personal, like, I won't be a part of that, which is just really sparking some incredible discussion right now.
So you're really enriched by the thing of where empathy is supposed to build bridges, and both James and I are setting limits.
Which I just think is awesome. Like, it lights me up. Like, I just like, it's so great when people get clear on values, you know, individually, and then we're talking about collective values. I also loved what James brought up about, like, is getting angry not professional? I thought that was an amazing question. I'm really I was like, huh, yeah, I don't know.
So you're really enervated by and energized by the conversation, and you were also struck by what James said is getting angry unprofessional. You don't know that.
I also love that James was talking about, I don't want to curse. And I think, there's that great quote by Martin Luther King about, a riot is the language of the unheard. It's kind of like, again, there's some oppressor or perceived oppressor, whether it's real or perceived. And it's like, I feel like I have no other choice but to act in this way. And so it's interesting to empathize with both sides,
So you're feeling and you're likening James's reaction to Martin Luther King, or at least what he said about his, if I'm not heard, or the language of protest is people being not heard. And so you're exploring that and you're looking into that.
So I do couples coaching as well as other coaching. And it's really interesting. I've seen one person get really infuriated when it's like you make a request to be heard or to have a dialogue, and no request is an obligation. But if you just leave it infinitely hanging without some type of term of like, hey, tomorrow or next month or when I'm resourced, basically, then that's infuriating and not really with the value of equality in a sense. So if we're in relationship and if we're creating something from this space of we and us, then I think we need to come to some type of agreement of like, something happened, there's a rupture in connection, and maybe repair is a value.
Okay. So you're talking about when people need to be heard and there's sort of a delay, an indefinite delay can be very frustrating. And so, I'm sorry, you're looking for a way to kind of facilitate that sort of communication. So to recognize the needs of the person who needs to, wait a minute, I'm not ready to do this, but at a certain point, really have the problem addressed.
Yeah. Because it's like, that is what the empathy circle is awesome at, right? It's like, that's what it's for. So it's like, if you're not willing to use this process, when these type of things are inevitably going to happen, then you're not really, committed to creating the culture of empathy to me. And I don't want to say that to create an out group, but it's like, I think that's why these values are really important. So then we can say, hey, this is what this is about. Are you in alignment with these values or not?
So you're saying that if you are not willing to participate in a culture of empathy, or at least or in your empathy circle, or at least have an empathic dialogue, you're not really committed to the values of a culture of empathy.
Yeah. So I think repair is really important. It's a big value of mine too. In any relationship, it's like, we're going to make mistakes. We're human beings. So we have to make a commitment to come back together when something happens. And therefore, we tie in humility and forgiveness. There's this art of like allowing someone to save face and not rub it in more if they end up being wrong or something like that. Right.
So you really value the action of repair. And we are going to make mistakes. So it's very important that we recognize humility and forgiveness, and then, try to make amends and repair and to rebuild the dialogue.
Thank you.
Okay. James, would you listen to me?
I will.
Okay. So I have a lot of strong feelings right now. And I feel in a way that I'm being empathy shamed. So I really don't, I'm a little bit lost. I find that your analogy about the people, the African Americans at the lunch counter, it doesn't apply to what we were talking, because we were reaching out for dialogue with you, gave you several chances, and yet you acted as though we were torturing you, which I think is not the case. I'll stop there.
You have a lot of feelings right now. You think you're being empathy shamed, and the example of the African Americans at the lunch counters doesn't fit, because you created some opportunities for dialogue, and I didn't take them. I didn't take you up on them.
Thanks, James. And then the other, let's see, what was that? Yeah, and then the other issue is that I don't feel, James, that you're taking responsibility, and I realize I'm not phrasing this exactly. So I like you, James. So I just want you to know I might be making a mistake here. I acknowledge that, and I may not be saying things in the most empathic way, but you know, I don't mean it. I'll stop there.
You'd like me to take more responsibility for what's happening.
Yeah, no, and you didn't. When you made that comment in that box, there are many ways you could choose to express yourself about disagreement. I feel uncomfortable with what she's saying, but you said, I don't have to listen to this shit. And I think a facilitator has a certain amount of discernment about how to use that, and you're not taking responsibility for the choices you made. I'll stop there.
You're angry that I'm not taking responsibility for the choices I'm making. And the example is framing it like in a crude way, telling that woman, I can't listen to this shit, rather than being empathic towards her at that time.
Yeah, not quite. Just you could express your disagreement. That's but you don't have to say. There's a difference between saying, God, I don't agree with this, or something like that, and saying, I don't have to listen to this shit. There's a choice there. There's a discernment that needs to be made. I'll stop there.
There's a choice around the language that is used.
Right. That's right. And I feel you haven't taken responsibility about that. And that's one of the key factors that I'm trying to do right now, take responsibility for my language. For instance, not, empathically reflecting you, which wasn't what we were supposed to be doing then, in the circle, rather than setting a limit. I'll stop there.
You're trying to take responsibility now, here, rather than at that time when it wasn't the agreement at that time to reflect anyone or be empathic towards anyone.
Yeah, I'm always responsible. I'm not trying to. It's complicated. There's a lot of complicated things here. I don't want to get too far in.
You're frozen, Bill.
He's been having some periodic computer problems, and sometimes it freezes, and then he has to exit and come back. So I think that might have just happened. It takes him sometimes a while to exit.
In the meantime, shall I move on?
Yeah, we could, come back to him. It might take, we don't know how long it's going to take.
Okay. Brian, would you listen to me?
I am listening.
I'm willing to agree that cursing at someone is abuse. I also think that excluding people is abuse.
Mm.
And I hear a lot of acknowledgement about, saying the wrong words is abusive. And I don't hear as much talk and acknowledgement about how excluding people and blocking them or not talking to them, taking a stance of let's isolate someone. I don't hear a lot of acknowledgement that that's abusive. I hear that as being framed as, oh, that's just people being free, right? So somehow, people somehow excluding someone systematically from everything is people making choices about their boundaries. But cursing and being angry is somehow a violent act of abuse, not people making choices about freely making choices about the words that they want to use. So there is a disparity around and it's an issue. Who gets to decide what abuse is? If the authority will predictably decide that if a police dog rips off your arm, that is keeping the peace. But if you if you kick the dog off of you, that is a violent act by a criminal. It's a very much ideological determination to say, okay, I'm yelling at you now and I'm saying I can't put up with this shit. That's abusive. But if you, for 2 years, systematically avoid any dialogue with me, that's just making a free choice to take care of yourself.
So I heard you start with, I'm willing to acknowledge that, cursing at someone is abuse. So I do take responsibility for that. And I feel like there's a disparity because it's like, well, isn't silence a different type of abuse that's insidious almost? It goes behind the scenes, under the radar. It could happen for years and not be noticed.
Yeah. And I don't want to force anyone into an empathy circle, because as soon as someone is forced to have an empathy circle, everything, that's not a culture of empathy for me. It would ruin, it would spoil the pot completely. So I'm real happy that people have the freedom to come to empathy circles if they want to. And that's what drew my red flag when somehow participating in an empathy circle was the requirement for doing the facilitation training. That seemed like it was loading the empathy circle. And also, what was the problem? I have a team that I work with around how I'm systematically excluded, and I wanted to invite my team to that empathy circle. Why did Bill say no? Why did he limit it to one person? Why wouldn't he say, wonderful, you have a bunch of people who understand you and who can come and add value to the conversation? Bring them all. So that was the second red flag, that what was happening was an empathy circle with different assumptions that seemed hostile to me.
So I'm hearing that word hostile, and I can sense the anger behind that. It's like, isn't empathy circles about inclusion? Like I had this group of people that could speak to silence, I think you were saying, and being excluded, and they weren't allowed. So it felt like this power over again that was like determining what was right and wrong and good and bad or something.
Yeah, they could come and speak about my experience of systematic exclusion from spaces. And I don't have to constantly be the one constantly explaining, constantly standing up for myself.
Okay. So it's like, it's hard for me, like if I'm being you, it's like, it's hard for me to keep standing up for myself when I'm the one being systematically excluded. So I wanted this group of people to come and hopefully be able to speak for me, because it's hard to stand for myself in that way.
Yes. And that's time for me. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks. Did you want to go back to Bill there? You got cut out. I mean,
yeah, let's see where you were speaking to Bill, was that right?
I was speaking to James, and it was
okay.
pretty much the end of my time.
Do you want to finish up something just to kind of
for right now, let's just, there was a flow, and let's just go with the flow. Okay. That's fine. Cool.
Edwin, would you listen?
Yep, listening.
Okay. So I guess what I'm in touch with right now for myself and in my body is, anger is something, it's a pointer to something that really matters. And so I think that's what I'm appreciating about this whole conversation. It's about, what matters here. And I love that word matter, because it has care, and care is about values, right? There are deep values here that are both individual and shared.
So you're just noticing, seeing that the anger is sort of a sign of something is really mattering and something that people really care about, and just sort of having that awareness that how that relates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't know what the value here would be, but I noticed that anytime there's a conflict, you know, I've been seeing this in couples, it's just really helpful to have that triangle, that third person to, if anything happens, like what would a value be where someone else could come in and kind of mediate that dialogue.
So if you're seeing it like in conflict, it helps to have other people in the conflict. If it's between two people, it's helpful to have someone else that can kind of help facilitate or mediate or just be another presence.
I think because it goes beyond just another presence. I think it literally shifts the dynamic from me versus you to, okay, you two are together and I'm holding space for the us to now work that out.
Okay, so it brings in a quality of more of a community us sense. It's not just me against you, but there's a group here. There's an us, a community here.
Yeah, because I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard this somewhere, like, or if you just imagine it, like being directly across from the table from someone is opposing almost, versus if we're on the same side and we sit together and we look at what are we creating, then that literally changes the physical and like mental construction of how we're dialoguing.
So you're just seeing that it's like, where is our focus? Is our focus on me or you? Versus that we're sitting outside and looking at this relationship together. So we're kind of together looking at the quality maybe of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what else is values that have come up here for me? I don't know about a value, but I'm seeing, what I'm hearing is like, it's really important to have definitions for things so that we can have a shared something. What is abuse, right? How are we agreeing to handle conflict? I'll stop there.
Yeah, so it's like these different terms. What do these terms mean? Like, what does conflict mean? What does abuse mean? And so kind of having some kind of a shared understanding of what we're talking about is helpful.
Yeah, so I guess maybe a value is shared reality. In other words, I just love that Venn diagram kind of image of like, okay, cool, let's like see where we are so that we can create, because like there's all this stuff in the way. There's a lot, expectations, conclusions, judgments, assumptions, all these things that are in the way. We think we're talking about the same thing, but we're really not.
Yeah, so when we have these dialogues, we're talking about these issues, we might be talking about different things. It gets very muddled and very confused, and what are we actually talking about? And so having some sense of clarity about what we actually are talking about is helpful.
Yeah, I think boundaries, I don't know if that's a value or if that's built into psychological safety or where boundaries fits, but I'm hearing part of this discussion be that, right? It's like no one here wants to force anyone to do anything. Right? And so how are we respecting each other's individual boundaries?
So you're having a lot of questions about all these terms and issues, for example, like boundaries. What does boundaries mean? How do we respect people's boundaries? And maybe even how does that relate to a culture of empathy? Just, what is this, trying to get some clarity of the relationship and of all this.
This other question that's coming to my mind from this one TED Talk on how to disagree productively was, she says, she asked two people when she gets in a room, before they get in a room or something, what would it take to change your mind? And I just love that question because it's coming in with humility. It's like, okay, I'm approaching it from like, hey, I want to see something I'm not seeing.
So to come into this, you need to, again, you've brought up the humility sort of repeatedly. Hey, this humility is really important. So you kind of have this sense of openness to sort of see new things and be humble about that. is a sort of a core value.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Bill, can I speak to you?
Sure.
Yeah, so what was alive for me was the word empathy shaming. So I just wanted to kind of speak to that. I think it's sort of like this ongoing learning, you know, around empathy. I hope it's not. I hope there was no sense of shame. Yeah.
So you were talking about empathy shaming, and that it's an ongoing learning, and you hope that there's no sense of shame.
I like the human-centered design concept of fail early, fail often. Because that's my experience with the last 14 years. It's like fail early, fail often, because it's an ongoing struggle. And it's just like an ongoing failure. And so many people have been pissed off and have said, I'm not dealing with you anymore. It's like, yeah, so I think it's, you know, that's how I kind of see it is, you know, I'm just learning all the time, you know, and yeah, and talk to my partner, Joan, about that.
So you like human-centered design and, you know, fail early, fail often, and you're kind of reflecting on your relationships in your life, and there's a lot of failure involved, and it's really nice to have a sense of humor about it, learn from it, and move on.
Yeah, it could be like, hey, we failed at empathy. Yay, let's celebrate. Cool, super cool. Let's have a big party. We failed. Great, because we're going to learn something about it. So, I mean, it's really kind of arbitrary what we associate with different experiences, right? It's like, oh, you know, something broke down. Do we feel kind of heavy and in pain about it? Or do we say, hey, that is great, you know? So it seems to be that you can sort of make any sort of association. So the human-centered design, they really try to make a point out of the failures.
So you're saying that, you know, all of our experience is subjective and you can make out of it what you want. And so therefore, why not choose to celebrate failures and have a good time instead of a bad time?
Yeah, you can try to make it. It's hard to really do it. It's like we can try. It's like, you know, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we can do it. The other thing is to actually do it. It's like, you know, it gets so attached to these different things. So I guess maybe having a little lightheartedness too, and all the pain and chaos and floating around there.
You appreciate a sense of humor among all of the heavy issues of the day, and, you know, and it helps kind of keep you on track and moving forward.
Yeah, and I appreciate your sense of humor too.
You appreciate my sense of humor. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel heard.
Okay, you feel heard. Okay. Do we have time, or do you need to go back? It's about 1:45.
What do you want? One last?
Sure. Okay, I'll do. Okay. Brian?
I'm listening.
Okay, great. So I'm more confused about the cultures and values of empathy now than I was, and I feel very frustrated because I feel that my experience is really not being heard and valued. And whereas people are saying in the abstract, oh yeah, let's do this, that hasn't been my experience. And so I feel profoundly unheard about that. I'll stop there.
Okay, you feel profoundly unheard and frustrated. You're more confused now than before about, you know, what is this culture of empathy and the values there.
Right. So, I mean, one of the things we talked about is like, well, you kind of I think it might have been Edward, but whoever, you know, if you're not going to participate in an empathy circle, well, and you're not empathic, you're not building a culture of empathy. Well, you know, there were empathic actions before Carl Rogers, and there will be ones, and there are people today who are doing empathic actions who have no idea what an empathy circle is. So the empathy circle, as I see it, is a tool that then connects to a greater vision of a culture of empathy. And a tool has certain limitations and things like that, and can be used in different ways. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. I'll stop there.
Okay, so if I'm getting you right, it's like whether I participate in an empathy circle or not doesn't mean I'm building culture of empathy or not. It's actually just a tool. It's like some people don't even know about this process and they're still very empathetic and still building a culture of empathy.
Yeah, I'm not so agnostic about the tool. I love the tool. And I think it's really valuable. You know, I think it's like almost like, you know, these multi-tools. And so I think it can be really, I mean, I could see the applications in a whole bunch of places. But as, you know, and I'm not, you know, I don't want it to become a religion. It's not, it is not an end in itself. It is a means to an end.
So it's like you said, I'm not agnostic, meaning like I'm not indifferent about the tool. I don't want to sound like that. I highly value it, but I don't want it to become a religion as like the only way to create a culture of empathy or something like that.
Right, and I have to you know, also talk about, you know, being a team member. A team member is a two-way street. And I guess that's the frustration that I'm seeing, is that my experience and what I say is not being really internalized and taken and then responded to in the manner in which it was intended.
So it's like I'm still feeling unheard. I'm not being responded to in a way, in the manner in which it was intended. So it's like I'm still trying to get something across and it's not landing.
Right. No, I mean, it's very simple. I say, okay, let's talk about it. And then people say that's an inquisition, or that's not empathic, or something like that. Well, let's engage in the dialogue. That seems to be a reasonable way to go about that. But I'm not hearing that.
So it's like I put out an invitation, but it was received or perceived as an inquisition. Like it wasn't actually it wasn't this demand. It was like an invitation for a dialogue.
Right. And as I come to the end of this, although I certainly, as Edwin said, we're always failing, and it's nice to have a sense of humor, and it's nice to, you know, evolve. And that includes me. I can do that. Anytime when I'm facilitating that somebody starts to name people and make a personal attack and curse at people, I'm going to set a limit. And that's just who I am. And maybe I'm not empathy tent material. I'll stop there.
So if I'm getting you right, there's still like a little bit of hurt and firmness around, you know, my own personal standards and boundaries. And anytime someone names someone or does something that I perceive as abuse, like I'm not going to stand for that. And maybe I'm not empathy tent material if that's the case.
Yeah, and I'm not, you know, I'm not defining myself so narrowly. I have a wide range of tolerance, but you know, I was a special education teacher. I know what abuse is. I've seen it, and that's not why I was put on the earth.
Yeah, so I hear you have a wide range of tolerance and want that acknowledged as well alongside. Like I won't tolerate abuse though.
Thank you. I feel fully heard.
Thank you.
Okay, so I just closing the rooms, and we can head in there. So thanks. This was great discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Okay. The others should be here shortly, probably wrapping up. They have 36 seconds.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm on the third floor here and it's like 35 degrees. I'm just been sweating this whole time.
Where are you at?
I'm in Ottawa, Canada, and no AC here.
It's cool here, Bay Area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, Pavel, it's gone dark. Are we all in, Edwin?
Kevin is still
okay.
He should, but yeah, I think we could start. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Oh, there is. Okay, great. All right. So this is the time when we kind of harvest our experiences. Again, we want to end on time. We're pretty close to that end, so please, keep your reflections short. I want to say that tomorrow we're having a culture with the XR principles that we're on the demands now, I believe, and the XR demands. And so that will happen at 10 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday. And then a half an hour after this call at 12:30 Pacific time, we'll have a facilitators meeting, which is a different format from the circle. And then if you want to facilitate or do anything like that, then it's good to either listen to what people are doing in their facilitation projects, or you can get on the agenda and you'll have 15 minutes to basically conduct that as you wish. Okay, so I'll start. And Brian, could you give us your...
Yeah, so what am I taking away? Just had a really incredible conversation. I got to see the power of an empathy circle even more as an incredible process for, as we know, everyone to feel heard. And I think for me, psychological safety is still like an underpinning piece that kind of allows everything else to stack on top of it. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. James?
Yeah, good time today. Difficult time, difficult for me, but worthwhile. There's still, empathy is a word, means different things to different people. Wearing a t-shirt doesn't make you empathic. Calling yourself empathic doesn't make you empathic, but it's possible. It's a good start. Thank you, I'm done.
Sure, James. Okay, Edwin?
Yeah, it was great. Just some real kind of thorny issues came up. I got a whole list of different values, and it seemed like there was a lot of still loose ends. It seems like we needed another 2 hours maybe to, or maybe even 3 more hours to really unravel. There was so much that we were coming up with. And so I really kind of expanded sort of my awareness. So I really appreciate what everybody contributed. Yep.
Great. Thanks, Edwin. Sophia?
Yes, I just want to say, Edwin, we didn't have a permission to record, so I think you have to do that before you, yeah, exactly. Just to let you know. I just want to thank you, James, for saying the things that he said in the beginning, because it really inspired us to discuss what the values of a culture of empathy is. And what we discussed was having boundaries, sticking to the guidelines, and creating safety for people to be vulnerable. And I also want to thank you, Pavel, for doing a great job.
Thanks, Sophia. Pavel?
Hello. So, James, I do agree with you, and I can notice that to a lot of people, empathy means different things. And I can see this in all the empathy circles I had so far. And we had a really lovely group. We managed to really dig deep within the value system that an empathy, building a culture of empathy should have. And yes, thank you. That's all.
Okay. Divya?
So I really enjoyed today's session, and I was facilitating, and it was really fun, actually. We were 5, but I think a couple of them had to go a little early, and I also faced issues with recording because it dropped off in between. But there were some very interesting things I learned about empathy today. Anish taught us that you have to empathize with yourself first if you want to, empathize with other people and make a difference, which I think was a very valuable lesson for me today. And we also kind of came to a conclusion that everybody's problem is a problem. It could be smaller compared to another person's problem, but I think a problem is a problem, and it has to be communicated and empathized with. But thank you so much for the session.
Bill's connection sometimes goes out, and so see, Anish, I'll do the calling. Anish, do you want to go?
Yeah, thank you so much for the experience. This was a very new format. I find challenge when things are very process oriented or structured. So it was definitely challenging for me, especially the 3 minutes format, 3 minutes to speak. And then, so when it shifted to 5 minutes, I think it gave me a little more spaciousness. So that was interesting to experience that. And also as already said, empathy means different things for different people. So that was also a very interesting way to look at how our own conditioning creates meanings about it. And we're all trying to co-create the same meaning around the word empathy. So that was a nice discovery to have.
Okay, great, thanks. Dean?
I'd like to thank James for stimulating a large conversation. Someone's small problems to someone else is a big problem. So things are relative, but everything should be done with respect, and there should be boundaries. And the 3-strike rule is an American rule, and I think it's a really good rule because we should always forgive someone, but we should not enable them to keep doing the same behavior. And empathy is an important thing, but we must not be enabling, but we must be empathic. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Kevin?
It was a great call today. I really appreciate everyone in our room. It was nice. One thing that that really came to me to the surface was, I think that empathy is empathic, or the process is a learned process. Like, I think sympathy comes naturally, but I think the empathy process is something that you must learn, and it's something you have to work towards. That's one thing that came to the surface for me. Another one, very briefly, was how do we teach it? Like, in terms of how do you bring it to your work culture? And then once you bring it to your work culture, how do we make it a curriculum component so that our education process is teaching this to children, considering how much time we have left. Thank you very much for facilitating this call today and having the space. I really, really appreciate being able to learn. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So, Sarah?
Yeah, I do appreciate our conversation was inspired by James, and we shared about the importance of having boundaries to create safety, and the importance of communicating with respect and not enabling. So, in order to create safety. Thank you.
Okay, I think, does that, oh, Bill, did you go?
No, I didn't. I
Okay,
just popped back in.
okay.
Yeah. I'm in a very strange place. While I respect the issues that James brought, I don't like being cursed at, and I didn't feel good about that at all. That's not why I come here. And so I was really, I'm more at sea about a culture of empathy now than I was before. But I'm really game. I trust the process, and I really game to continue to engage with James and everybody else, and to see where that might possibly go. But I'm clear on who I am and what I value. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to take us out, or we're...
Sure, I guess, I don't know if you did. Well, thanks for coming and sharing your lives with us. It's always, even if it's difficult and painful, it's always a growing experience. We welcome you back again in a half an hour to this Zoom room. And I don't know, Edwin, do you want to do a facilitator's debrief now, or is it enough
no, I
time?
think that's too short of a time. I think we need to take a break.
Yeah, sure.
You know,
Okay.
we got 30 minutes. I got to go to the bathroom. My
Right, okay,
bladder is
yeah,
bursting.
Okay, so that is good. Yeah, and Pavel, yes. Pavel, I see. You're muted, Pavel. Pavel, you're muted.
I apologize for taking the time. Just something that Divya said, that we should empathize with ourselves first. And this is something that I was reflecting on the other day. And it came to me that the best way to empathize with yourself is to meditate. When you meditate, your thoughts come to surface. You reflect on your thoughts. You empathize with the unexpressed emotions, thoughts, ideas, whatever it is. So meditation, it's like empathizing with yourself, or it can be used to empathize with yourself. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavel. All right, well, we'll see
All
you.
right.
Go
Bye,
relieve your
everyone.
bladder. Go.
Thanks, everyone.
My bladder, go.
Go home. We'll see you.